Johnny Carson sat across from the 7 most promiscuous actresses Hollywood couldn't ignore. The word was promiscuous. Hollywood used it like a knife, almost always against women, almost never against the men who behaved the same way. 1963. A studio chair on national television. A woman sat down across from Johnny Carson, crossed her legs, and the network's lawyer started sweating in the control room. She was not wearing underwear. She had told them she would not. She was 61 years old, and she had been refusing to wear underwear in public since the studio executives who tried to make her had been alive. Her name was Tallulah Bankhead, and she was only number 2 on this list. Carson did not need a confession to understand what he was watching. He had the chair. The chair was where America saw charm. Carson saw timing. America saw diamonds. Carson saw defenses. America saw a woman laughing about husbands, lovers, and headlines. Carson saw the one question almost nobody asked out loud. Was she truly promiscuous? Or had Hollywood simply found the easiest word to punish a woman who refused to be quiet? 7 women sat in that chair, with reputations that entered the room before they did. Some played the label, some weaponized it. One of them would see her own love life become a homicide investigation, with a 14-year-old girl and a kitchen knife at the center of it. This is not a list of bad women. It is a list of 7 women Hollywood called dangerous, because each of them, in her own way, refused to want quietly. The chair did not judge, it revealed. Most of America met Johnny Carson the way they met their own kitchen lights, without thinking. He hosted The Tonight Show for 30 years, 5 nights a week, 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The country went to bed with him, but the chair across from his desk was not really a chair. It was a confession booth, disguised as a piece of NBC furniture. Presidents sat there. Astronauts sat there. Movie stars sat there. And every so often, a woman walked through that curtain with a reputation already louder than her career. And Carson did the only thing a sharp interviewer ever does. He waited. He waited until the joke became a confession. He waited until the flirtation became strategy. He waited until the laugh told him something the publicist had been paid not to say. To make this list, a woman had to bring 3 things into Carson's studio. A public image America thought it understood, a private reputation that made that image unstable, and a love life that had grown larger than the work itself. 7 women cleared that bar. 2 of them, Hollywood made into legends. 1 of them, Hollywood made into a punchline. 1 of them, Hollywood made into a crime scene. And the word it used to file all 7 of them under was the same. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you may decide that the word was never really about the women at all. Number 1. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Hollywood thought it was laughing at her. Hollywood was being managed by her. Most people remember Zsa Zsa as a name without a movie. They cannot tell you what she was famous for exactly, and that is the point. Because the truth is, she was famous for being famous, decades before anyone had a phrase for that. She invented the job. Hollywood just hadn't named it yet. Zsa Zsa was Hungarian. She was beautiful, and she was, by her own count, married 9 times. The number changed depending on which interview you read. Some sources say 7, some say 9. Zsa Zsa herself rarely confirmed and rarely denied. The vagueness was deliberate. It made every man she had ever been with a public mystery, and every divorce a small commercial for the next chapter. She did not enter a room. She introduced herself to it. In November of 1963, she walked onto The Tonight Show with Marlon Brando seated beside her. Brando, by this point in his career, was a giant, twice the Oscar winner, the face of post-war American cinema. He was supposed to be the headline. He was, in fact, furious, because before he could finish a sentence, Zsa Zsa had already talked over him in that thick Hungarian accent and turned the entire interview into a referendum on her love life. The clip became one of the most replayed Tonight Show moments of that decade. Brando wanted to talk about acting. Zsa Zsa wanted to talk about money. That was the trick. People underestimated her because she chose to be underestimated. While the Hollywood gossip columns ran story after story about her latest husband, Zsa Zsa was negotiating fees, building real estate holdings, and teaching herself a lesson that very few women in her industry had figured out yet. The public would pay to watch her get married, get divorced, complain, sparkle, and walk away with the house. She put it best herself on Carson's stage more than once. "I am a marvelous housekeeper," she would say. "Every time I leave a man, I keep his house." The audience laughed every time. They thought it was a punchline. It was a business model. Hollywood called Zsa Zsa promiscuous because she had collected too many husbands. The word fit the way the audience wanted to see her. But Carson, sitting 2 feet away, was watching something else. He was watching a woman in her late 40s, in a country that had no patience for women in their late 40s, who had figured out how to keep her name on the front page of every newspaper in America without ever doing the kind of work the industry was supposed to require. Every divorce was a press release. Every diamond was a receipt. Every appearance was a small, perfectly engineered ad for the next Mr. Gabor. Hollywood thought she was the joke. Hollywood was the joke. By the time she sat across from Carson, she had outlived most of her husbands and outlasted most of the actresses her own age. She had a Beverly Hills mansion. She had a daughter. She had real money. And she had the only thing Hollywood couldn't sell back to her, a name that the country still remembered. Zsa Zsa was not ruined by the word promiscuous. She set diamonds in it and sold it back to America at a markup. But Zsa Zsa still played the game in pearls and punchlines. The next woman did not decorate the rules. She behaved as if the rules had never been written. Number 2. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah did not break Hollywood's rules. She refused to acknowledge that they had ever been written down. If you were alive in 1944, you knew Tallulah's voice. Even if you had never seen her on a stage, even if you had never heard one of her radio shows. Her voice traveled. It was deep, smoky, and always sounded like it was coming from a woman who had just laughed too hard about something she shouldn't have. She called everyone darling. She called everyone darling because by the time she was 40, she had stopped trying to remember names. Tallulah came from a powerful Alabama political family. Her father was a United States congressman. By any reasonable expectation, she should have lived a quiet, ladylike Southern life. Instead, she ran to London at 19, became a stage star in the West End, and developed a public personality so loud that even Britain, a country built around discretion, couldn't quite contain her. She drank, she partied, she had affairs with men, she had affairs with women. She talked about all of it. She wrote about most of it. She held court at parties for hours, told dirty jokes at funerals, and once, by her own admission, slept on the floor of a hotel because the bed had a man she was trying to forget in it. In 1943, while filming Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, the entire crew complained to the studio. Tallulah, they said, was not wearing underwear. She had been climbing in and out of the boat for weeks. The crew had seen everything. Hitchcock, who was famous for being unflappable, answered with the only sentence anyone remembers from that production. "I don't know," he said, "whether it's a problem for wardrobe or for hairdressing." That was Tallulah Bankhead, 1943. By the time she sat across from Johnny Carson in the early 1960s, she had already shocked Britain, shocked Broadway, shocked Hollywood, and survived all of it. She was over 60. She was thinner than she had been. Her voice was deeper. She still smoked constantly. And she still wore exactly what she wanted to. Carson knew what was coming the moment her name was on the schedule. The control room knew. The legal department knew. Tallulah did not flirt with scandal. She did not even particularly like scandal. She just refused to organize her own body around someone else's idea of decency. To her, censorship was the rude one. Censorship was the embarrassment. Her body had been on this earth for over 6 decades and had not killed anyone yet. And she could not understand, she said many times, why a network in New York thought it could legislate around it now. Hollywood called her promiscuous because she had affairs with men and women, and would not pretend otherwise. Hollywood called her wild. Hollywood called her difficult. What Hollywood would not say, on any of those occasions, was the simple version. Tallulah Bankhead, on the chair across from Carson, was a woman who had been famous for 40 years, who had collected more lovers than most men in her industry, and who had never apologized to a single audience for any of them. She had earned every wrinkle, every low note in her voice, every laugh that started in her chest and finished on the other side of the room. She did not flirt with scandal. She made scandal feel like it had shown up to the party underdressed. Tallulah shocked America because she refused to hide. The next woman shocked America because she refused to stop talking. Number 3. Shelley Winters, 2 Academy Awards, and a memory that Hollywood had been praying she would lose. Most people who picture a Hollywood scandal queen picture someone glamorous, tall, blonde, bombshell, a face built for posters. Shelley Winters was none of those things. And that is the most important sentence in this whole section. Because if Shelley had looked like Marilyn Monroe or Jayne Mansfield or Rita Hayworth, the men of Hollywood could have explained her away as just another beautiful woman they couldn't help themselves around. Shelley was short, round-cheeked, brilliantly funny, wore her insecurity in public the way other actresses wore furs. She won her first Oscar in 1959 for The Diary of Anne Frank. She won her second in 1965 for A Patch of Blue. By the time she was 50, she was one of the most respected character actresses in America. And she remembered everything. Shelley wrote 2 memoirs. The first one came out in 1980. It was called Shelley, also known as Shirley. The second one came out in 1989. It was called Shelley 2, The Middle of My Century. Together, they ran more than 900 pages. And inside those pages, Shelley named names. She named William Holden. She named Burt Lancaster. She named Errol Flynn. She named Marlon Brando. She told the kind of stories about each of them that men in Hollywood had been telling about their own conquests for decades, except Shelley was telling them in the wrong direction. The men were the conquests now. The women, specifically Shelley, were the ones holding the diary. Hollywood was not prepared for this. When Shelley walked onto The Tonight Show, Carson was watching one of the most dangerous guests of his entire career. Not dangerous in the sense of violence, dangerous in the sense of memory. Shelley had been everywhere, slept with everyone Hollywood considered untouchable, and was now, in middle age, running entirely out of patience for keeping their secrets. Carson would lift a pen, as if to write something down. Shelley would take that as a starting gun. The audience would howl. Carson would reach for a commercial break. Shelley would keep going. Now, here is the detail that matters most. The detail that Margaret-aged viewers across America have spent 4 decades repeating to friends, half remembering, getting almost right. In her own memoir, Shelley described one of the most photographed leading men of the 1950s, a man whose posters sold to American teenagers by the millions. She described him in 7 words. Quote, "A great kisser, selfish in every other way." End quote. Hollywood had spent 20 years and millions of dollars building that man's mythology. They had built him into an icon of romance. They had sold him as the husband America wished it had married. And in 7 words, Shelley had wiped his bedroom reputation off the map. Nobody sued her. Not him, not the studio, not the heirs. Why? because she had something the studios had spent decades teaching women not to keep. She had her diaries. She had her dates. She had her notebooks. She had photographs. She had hotel receipts. She had, in some cases, the specific room numbers, and she had named them in her memoir with the same matter-of-fact tone other actresses used to name their hairdressers. Hollywood had a problem. If you are a famous male actor in 1978, and the woman writing about you can produce a hotel receipt from 1953, you have only two options. You can deny the affair, in which case her receipt makes you a liar in public, or you can ignore the book entirely and hope no one in America still cares. They all chose to ignore it. Hollywood pretended Shelley's books did not exist. Carson, on the other hand, treated them like gospel. Every time Shelley returned to The Tonight Show, the audience leaned in a little bit further. Every time, Carson smiled the same small smile and let her keep talking. He understood what Shelley was actually doing. She was not gossiping. She was correcting the historical record. For 30 years, the men of Hollywood had been allowed to write the history of their own desires. Shelley Winters, in 2 paperbacks and a lifetime of late-night appearances, had walked into that history, opened the file cabinet, and started writing in red pen. She did not merely have lovers. She kept receipts. She kept dates. She kept the 7 words that ended a man's legend. But there is a difference between a woman who tells her own story and a woman whose story was sold before she ever got to speak. Rita Hayworth belonged to the second category. Number 4. Rita Hayworth. Hollywood called her the love goddess. It never asked whether the goddess was allowed to choose her own believers. If you were a young man in America in 1946, the wall above your bed had a poster. The poster was a photograph of Rita Hayworth, taken for the film Gilda, in a black satin gown, her head thrown back, dark red hair falling almost to her waist. That image, that single photograph, was by some estimates the single most reproduced image of a woman in the United States during the 1940s. Soldiers carried it in their helmets. Returning veterans hung it on bedroom walls. The poster sold in such volumes that some historians have, only half-jokingly, called it the most efficient piece of American propaganda since the Statue of Liberty. But the woman in that photograph was not, technically, Rita Hayworth. Her real name was Margarita Carmen Cancino. She was Spanish on her father's side, Irish on her mother's. She had been born in Brooklyn. She had been put into nightclub dance acts at the age of 12. By the time the Hollywood studio system found her, she was barely a teenager and already trained to be polite to powerful men. The studios, in their wisdom, decided 2 things. They decided that the name Margarita Cancino was too ethnic for Middle America, so they renamed her Rita Hayworth. Softer, whiter, easier to put on a marquee. And they decided that her hairline was too low. Specifically, that the natural shape of her forehead made her face read as Spanish, rather than as the ambiguous, all-American beauty the studios wanted to sell. So they fixed it. They sent her, repeatedly, painfully, to electrolysis sessions to raise her hairline, lighten her natural color, and finish the job of converting Margarita into Rita. This is documented. This is not gossip. The love goddess, in other words, was constructed, and nobody knew this better than the woman inside the photograph. Rita said it herself, more than once, in the late 1940s and early 50s. She said it about Orson Welles, the genius director who became her second husband. She said it about each of her marriages after that. She said it on talk show after talk show. She said it in some form when she eventually appeared on The Tonight Show. The line came in different versions. The version most often quoted goes like this, quote, "Men go to bed with Gilda. They wake up with me." End quote. Read that sentence again, slowly, while you do whatever you are doing right now. Men did not go to bed with Rita Hayworth. Men went to bed with the photograph, with the gown, with the hair, with the fantasy the studio had built. They woke up next to a Brooklyn-born dancer named Margarita Cancino, who was tired, sometimes ill, and who had spent her childhood being told that her job, in any room, was to make adults comfortable. She married 5 times. Each marriage ended for a different reason. Each marriage was treated by the press as a new chapter in the saga of a woman who could not stay faithful. Hollywood called her promiscuous. The word fit the script. The script said she was a love goddess, and so any disturbance in her romantic life had to be her fault. Nobody ever asked the harder question. What does it do to a woman, over time, to be desired exclusively as a thing she is not? By the time Rita reached her late 50s, she was suffering from severe, early-onset Alzheimer's disease. For years, the press misread it as alcoholism. Studios had trained the country to assume the worst of beautiful women, and the country obliged. Rita's mind was failing in real time, on camera, and the response was to call her difficult. Hollywood called her promiscuous because Gilda slept with men on screen, but Margarita Cancino, the woman behind the myth, was paying the bill for a desire she had never been allowed to author. For Rita, desire became a prison. For the next woman, it became evidence. Number 5. Lana Turner. Lana Turner was not dangerous because she had too many lovers. Lana Turner was dangerous because one of them did not survive being one of them. Lana came up through MGM in the late 1930s. The studio called her the Sweater Girl after a single appearance in a tight-knit top in the film They Won't Forget. The name stuck for the rest of her life. She was blonde, she was small. She was photographed more in the 1940s than almost any actress alive. She was also, by every account, an extremely competent actress when given decent material, and would later receive an Academy Award nomination for Peyton Place. But Lana's reputation was always mainly about men. She married 7 times. She had affairs the press kept careful track of. By the late 1950s, her name in a tabloid headline was a guarantee of newsstand sales. The audience could not stop watching her romantic life. Neither, more importantly, could MGM. Because MGM, the most powerful studio in America at that time, had built half its business on Lana Turner, and the cost of protecting her had become a permanent line item in its publicity budget. In the autumn of 1957, Lana started seeing a man named Johnny Stompanato. Stompanato was a former United States Marine. He was good-looking, he was charming, and he had a second job that the studio did not love. He was a known associate of the West Coast organized crime figure Mickey Cohen. By any reasonable definition, Stompanato was a gangster. Lana knew, the studio knew. Stompanato made very little effort to hide it. He was also violent. The relationship escalated badly through 1957 and into 1958. Stompanato hit Lana. Stompanato threatened Lana. The studio sent people. The studio asked Lana to end it. Lana tried, several times. Stompanato refused. By the spring of 1958, the household was no longer a household. It was a slow-motion emergency taking place on Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. The other person living in that house was Lana's daughter. Cheryl Crane was 14 years old. On the night of April 4th, 1958, Stompanato and Lana were arguing in the upstairs bedroom of the Bedford Drive house. The shouting was loud enough to carry through the walls. Cheryl, in her own bedroom down the hall, heard it. She had heard it before. This time, she did something she had not done before. She walked into her mother's kitchen. She picked up an 8-inch carving knife, and she walked up the stairs to her mother's bedroom door. What happened in that bedroom would be argued about in court and in print for the rest of all 3 of their lives. Cheryl said she was trying to protect her mother. Cheryl said Stompanato turned toward her. Cheryl said the knife went in. Lana would later describe the moment in her own memoir as the worst seconds of her existence. And then, in the same memoir, contradict herself in small ways that would haunt the case forever. Johnny Stompanato died on the bedroom floor. Cheryl Crane was 14 years old. Now, here is the part of the story that Margaret-aged viewers across America have been arguing about for over 60 years, the part the press never fully reported, the part that even now, in the year you are watching this video, is still the most uncomfortable detail about the most photographed bedroom in 20th century American crime. Within hours of the killing, MGM moved. Not the police first, MGM first. The studio sent its top public relations executives to the house before Cheryl had been formally questioned. The studio brought in Jerry Giesler, the most famous defense attorney in California, the same lawyer who had represented Errol Flynn, Charlie Chaplin, and a long list of other movie industry figures whose private lives the public was never supposed to see. Giesler was at the Bedford drive home long before anyone outside the inner circle understood what had happened. By the time Cheryl Crane walked into a Los Angeles courtroom for the inquest, she had a story. She had, more accurately, a script. The version Cheryl told on the witness stand was clear, simple, and rehearsed. Stompanato was about to attack her mother. Cheryl, terrified, came in to defend her. The knife went forward, almost by reflex. The death was an accident in the service of saving a life. Justifiable homicide. The jury, hand-picked in a Los Angeles whose newspapers were still reading directly from MGM's press releases, agreed. The verdict was reached in 25 minutes. Cheryl Crane was never charged. She was, in the eyes of the law, an innocent 14-year-old girl who had saved her mother from a violent man. But here is the detail that matters. Cheryl Crane was wearing a dress her mother had chosen. Cheryl Crane was repeating sentences her mother's lawyer had practiced with her. That was not a teenage girl on the witness stand. That was a child being asked to save a movie career. The verdict was reached in 25 minutes. Lana Turner was back on a film set within the year. In 1959, she opened in Imitation of Life, playing, and this is real, a single mother who has to choose between her career and her child. The film was the highest-grossing release of her career. It was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. American audiences could not stop buying tickets because they could not stop watching the strange, terrible mirror between the fiction on screen and the courtroom they had just read about. Cheryl Crane spent the rest of her life answering for one moment her mother had walked her into. She wrote her own memoir, eventually. She told a version closer to her own truth. By that point, the public mind had already chosen which version it preferred. Hollywood called Lana Turner promiscuous because she had married 7 times and had loved violent men. Hollywood did not, ever, ask why the studio's first call had been to a defense attorney instead of an ambulance. Lana's scandal had a body. The next woman's scandals had something larger. An empire watching, judging, condemning, and unable to look away. Number 6. Elizabeth Taylor. 8 marriages to 7 men. The Vatican called her dangerous. The audience called her glamorous. Taylor herself called all of it, every wedding, every divorce, every diamond, every scandal, by one word. She called it love. If there is one woman on this list whom you almost certainly already know, it is Elizabeth Taylor. You know The Violet Eyes. You know National Velvet, the film she made at the age of 12, which made her one of the most famous children in the world. You know Cleopatra. You know The Diamonds. You know Richard Burton. Most of you have known about Richard Burton longer than you have known how to drive a car. Taylor was a child star. She grew up in front of America. By the time she was 25, she had already buried a husband, the producer, Mike Todd, who died in a plane crash in 1958. She had won her first Academy Award. She had made more box office than nearly any woman of her generation. And she had made one decision that would define the rest of her romantic life. She would never love quietly. When she married Eddie Fisher, 10 months after Mike Todd's death, The country reacted with disgust. Eddie Fisher had been Mike Todd's best friend. Eddie Fisher had been married, at the time of Todd's death, to America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds. The press called Taylor a homewrecker. They printed it on the front of every magazine in the country. Taylor did not respond. She married Fisher anyway. Then, 2 years later, in 1963, came Cleopatra. The film cost more to make than any previous film in history. The shoot collapsed in chaos. Taylor became seriously ill on set. Twice. The production moved from London to Rome. Taylor required an emergency tracheotomy. She nearly died. She survived. The film resumed. And on that set, in Rome, while still legally married to Eddie Fisher, Elizabeth Taylor began an affair with her co-star. His name was Richard Burton. What followed is the single largest tabloid story of the 20th century. The Vatican, and this is real, issued a public statement condemning Taylor. The exact phrase used by L'Osservatore della Domenica, the Vatican-affiliated newspaper, was erotic vagrancy. That phrase, in print, in 1962, from a Catholic publication against a major American actress in the middle of the largest film production in history. Taylor read the statement. She gave one of the most quoted responses of her career. "It made me," she said, "vomit." That sentence is not Hollywood. That sentence is not glamour. That sentence is a 30-year-old woman, one of the most famous people alive, finally getting tired of being told by men in robes how she was allowed to feel about the man she actually loved. She married Richard Burton in 1964. They divorced in 1974. They remarried in 1975. They divorced again in 1976. The press called the second divorce final. Taylor herself never quite did. Now, here is the part that matters. In the same decade Elizabeth Taylor was being publicly burned at the stake for her love life, the men around her were having affairs of their own, on a similar scale, with no consequences whatsoever. Frank Sinatra had decades of public affairs. None of them ever cost him a film role. Cary Grant married 5 times. Nobody ever called him promiscuous. Mickey Rooney married 8 times. 8. He is remembered as a comedy legend, not as a cautionary tale. In Hollywood, men who loved many women were called charming. Men who loved many women were called legends. Men who loved many women were called what their publicists asked them to be called. Elizabeth Taylor loved many men, openly, and the largest religious institution on earth issued a press release about it. Carson, sitting across from her on multiple Tonight Show appearances, never raised this contradiction directly. He didn't need to. Taylor was, by that point in her life, fully aware of every word the world had ever used about her, and she had stopped, somewhere along the way, defending herself. She would lift one of her enormous diamonds. She would smile slightly. She would let the audience finish the sentence in their own minds. The diamonds, by the way, were not vanity. The diamonds were a ledger. Mike Todd gave her diamonds. Richard Burton gave her diamonds. Each marriage came with a stone, and each stone was photographed, named, and entered into the public record. The Krupp diamond, the Taylor Burton, the La Peregrina pearl. America thought it was watching a woman accept gifts. Carson knew better. Carson was watching a woman document her own emotional history in the only currency Hollywood would let her keep. She did not love quietly. That was her crime. Not the number of men, the volume of the feeling. But Elizabeth was powerful enough to survive the names America called her. The 7th woman was not. Hollywood laughed at her body for 10 years, until the laughter found something it could not laugh through. Number 7. Jayne Mansfield, IQ 149. 5 languages, 2 musical instruments, one body that Hollywood never bothered to look past. Most people, when they hear the name Jayne Mansfield, picture exactly one thing: blonde, bombshell, the exaggerated cousin of Marilyn Monroe, a laugh in a publicity photograph, a long-running joke about a woman who wore tight dresses and stood next to taller men. That picture is not wrong. It is just incomplete. Jayne Mansfield, born Vera Jane Palmer in Pennsylvania in 1933, grew up reading. She studied piano. She studied violin. She spoke German. She studied Latin. She had, by every test administered to her, an IQ of around 149. That is a number well into genius range. Jayne knew it. She mentioned it in interviews, when interviewers were willing to listen, which was rarely. Hollywood, in the 1950s, had no role for that kind of woman. What Hollywood had was a vacancy. Marilyn Monroe was the biggest star in the world. The studios needed more like her. They needed, specifically, women with the same physical proportions, the same blonde hair, the same upturned voice. They were willing to pay enormous sums of money to any young woman who could approximate the Monroe formula. Jayne Mansfield made a decision. She would become the formula. She bleached her hair. She flattened her speaking voice. She studied Marilyn the way a younger sister studies an older one, with admiration, with envy, and with a quiet plan to take over once Marilyn slipped. She launched herself deliberately as the next blonde bombshell. The press played along, the studios played along, the public played along. And Jayne, the girl who could read music in 3 keys, became, on national television, a woman who pretended to giggle every time a microphone was pointed at her. It worked. Through the late 1950s, Jayne Mansfield was one of the most photographed women alive. She made films, she made appearances, she did Vegas, she did publicity stunts that were, even by mid-century Hollywood standards, extreme. She wore dresses designed to fail in public. She cultivated press encounters that produced the kind of photographs that, even in this video, would not be appropriate to show. And underneath all of it, the laugh, the dress, the giggle, the IQ, was a working mother of 5. When Jayne sat across from Johnny Carson in 1962, the studio was silent, in a way Carson knew well by then. The audience had been trained for a decade to laugh the moment Jayne walked through the curtain. The men in the room could not fully focus. Carson, as always, did the simplest thing. He treated her like a person. He asked her questions, real ones, about her piano playing, about her Latin, about her children. He let her talk briefly about something other than her body. For a few minutes, Jayne stopped performing. Then the music came back, the audience laughed again, and Jayne returns to the role America was paying her to play. On June 29, 1967, Jayne Mansfield was killed in a car crash on Highway 90, just outside New Orleans, on the way to a publicity appearance. The car contained 5 people. 3 of them were Jayne's children. All 3 children survived. One of those 3 children was 3 years old at the time. Her name was Mariska Hargitay. If that name sounds familiar to you, it is because Mariska Hargitay grew up to become one of the most respected actresses in American television. She has, for over 25 years, played Detective Olivia Benson on Law and Order Special Victims Unit, a show whose explicit subject is the lives of women who have been treated by the world as objects. The woman who turned her body into a punchline raised a daughter who spent her career making sure women on television were never punchlines again. Jayne never lived to see that. But maybe she did not have to. Some legacies do not need their authors present to finish writing themselves. The word was never neutral. 7 women, 7 reputations. 7 different ways one word was used to describe things Hollywood was too uncomfortable to understand. Zsa Zsa turned the word into jewelry. Tallulah turned it into protest. Shelley turned it into testimony. Rita was trapped inside it. Lana watched it become evidence in a homicide. Elizabeth made it too large for any institution to contain. And Jayne? Jayne was reduced by it, until the reduction itself became the tragedy. Carson sat across from all of them. He did not write their reputations. He did not invent the word. But he had the chair, and the chair had the camera. And the camera was where America made up its mind about which women deserved love and which women deserved a label. Because here's what nobody said out loud in any of those interviews, on any of those nights, on any of those tapes. In the same town, in the same decade, men were doing exactly the same things and being called legends. Frank Sinatra had affairs. Mickey Rooney had 8 wives. Cary Grant married 5 times. Warren Beatty kept a list. None of them were ever called promiscuous. They were called charming. That was not morality. That was marketing. So when Hollywood called these 7 women dangerous, maybe Hollywood was telling the truth, just not the whole truth. The whole truth is harder. These women did not all live wisely. They did not all live gently. They hurt people, used people, and lost people. Some of them lost themselves. But they also exposed something Hollywood spent 50 years trying to hide. Desire was never the scandal. The scandal was who was given permission to survive it. So, I want to hear from you. Of these 7 women, which one do you think was judged most unfairly by history? And which one truly used desire as power on her own terms? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this is your first time on the channel, this is what we do here. We open the rooms Hollywood would rather keep locked. We listen for the questions Carson never had to ask out loud, and we ask them anyway. Subscribe. Tap the bell. The next file finds you when it drops.